All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I'm Andrew, aka Skeptical Mindgasms, for the purposes of this video. And I'm going to, of course, talk about Jordan Peterson's recent appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast and the totally ridiculous claim that he made about climate change, basically, that it's a religion seeking population control. He basically made almost exactly that point. So I'm gonna get into this here.
And a great representation of that is what they've done with Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny, because I thought 10 years ago, we live in the delusion of a disturbed 13-year-old girl. How did that happen? And then, Greta Thunberg showed up and
Well, see, I agree that Greta Thunberg is if not disturbed 13-year-old girl, at least basically the same level of has the same level of climate expertise as Jordan Peterson, which is basically none. So, but obviously we're not living in the delusion of a 13-year-old girl. Jordan Peterson is just being phenomenally hyperbolic about reality as usual.
I thought, oh, well, there we go. Now we've got the 13-year-old. I feel sorry for her, because she was chased into this apocalyptic terror that we're trying to enforce on all our kids. And then you think about her position, so now she's all afraid.
Okay, so again, we're not trying to enforce this on all our kids. It's not like every parent is preaching this apocalyptic vision of climate change that Greta Thunberg talks about. And he's acting like people who talk about climate change as if it's a real thing are all like Greta Thunberg saying that the world's going to end in 12 years. But, in reality, if you actually even just look at what climate scientists say and what people say about climate change, it's, the reality of the situation seems to be that the climate change effects are going to be bad, and most coastal cities are going to be underwater between 2050 and 2100, and there are going to be, more natural disasters and fluctuations in temperatures and all sorts of other shit, and there's all sorts of evidence for it. But yeah, there are crazy people like Greta Thunberg, but that doesn't mean he uses this to discredit the entire idea of climate change as if it's some fraud of an idea based on a tiny minority of people who actually talk about the reality of climate change. And he's talking about even probably the minority of climate change activists is who he's talking about. I'm sure most people who talk about climate change are nothing like Greta fucking Thunberg, man.
And her mother's facilitating that like mad. And then, she announces her fear, her neurotic fear, essentially. It's driven by negative emotion. And, Macron says to her, oh my God, Greta, you're absolutely right, and bows. It's like, what the hell's a girl to think? Because what she really wants is to freak out a bit and for someone calm and reasonable to say, hey, look, kid, the apocalypse is always.
Okay, so yeah, it's it's not neurotic though. She's overreacting, and some people overreact, like Greta Thunberg and AOC and a whole bunch of other people definitely overreact, but it's based on literally the threat of apocalyptic events floods and wildfires and all sorts of natural disasters and shit like that. That's what they're worried about. They're worried about something that's worth worrying about. They're just overreacting about it. So, it's kind of an exaggeration to say the fucking least that it's just a neurotic fear, because that implies that there's nothing to be afraid about.
Always been on us. It's always the case that the future has the possibility of being dreadful. But, we've conquered terrible things in the past and overcome massive obstacles. And there's no reason at all not to assume that we can do the same thing.
That's a very important point.
Well, yeah.
It's such an important point because there's never been.
Yeah, I agree with that because it's a more optimistic and constructive perspective. That's a part of this perspective that I think makes a lot of sense.
A time ever where everything was perfect.
Well, that's for sure.
There's never been a time ever environmentally where the Earth.
Okay, but there's a difference between wanting to prevent the negative effects of climate change from getting way worse than they already are, and wanting the world to be perfect. I think a lot of people who talk about the importance of solving problems of climate change understand that you're not going to create some fucking utopia. That's so if you're implying that that's the idea of the average person who talks about how climate change is real or some shit like that, then that's definitely a straw man.
Earth was stable.
No.
If you go, I mean, stable, currently you can kind of like guess what the weather's going to be. But if you look at like models of like thousands of years, it's never been flat. It's always been up and down, heats up.
The Earth was
freezes.
an ice ball many times.
Many times.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that's totally true. There's a wild fluctuation. And then if you measure the fluctuations in temperature over a long period of time, you can see an increase in certain weather patterns and certain changes in the climates. And, it's different in a more extreme and more dangerous way is what the point is. That's totally true that the Earth is totally different. Like there were ice ages, for example, of course, but that's not really like that's a factor in the whole situation.
Well, Randall Carlson was saying there's been times in our like distant past where the CO2 levels and the oxygen levels were so fucked up that we were close to losing all life on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
And then this can happen.
See,
if I understand correctly, like based on what I've learned, humanity has come very close to extinction multiple times. So yeah, I think as far as I understand it, that's probably true.
The antithesis to that is to believe in something like the intrinsic paradisal stability of well-balanced Mother Nature.
Right.
It's like, yeah, a bit, but
yeah, there is this idea for sure. Like there are wacko climate change activists that have this idea, but like if you actually watch documentaries by climate change activists and stuff like that, even ones that are somewhat skeptical, like I forget the name of that one, but that one that was produced by Michael Moore that was banned and then was put back on YouTube. I forgot what that one was, but that was like, realistic approaches to climate change and honest conversations about reliance on electrical grids and how to use renewable energy and improve the technology and all that kind of shit. It's not this like, bro, we gotta like balance with Mother Nature, man. That doesn't seem like the majority of people who talk about climate change to me.
No, not really. There's a lot of variability, of course, that kind of variability, that's hard on people because you want a certain amount of stability so you don't die.
Right, but it doesn't deny that human beings have an impact on this either.
No. Well, this is why I really respect Bjorn Lomborg, because Lomborg's hard to grasp because he forces you to think.
That's true. I kind of respect that guy, but he gets a little bit extreme in his claims too. But as far as climate change skeptics go, he's more reasonable than a lot of other ones who are more extreme and bullshit a hell of a lot more than he does.
And complexly, he says, well, we don't have one problem, carbon dioxide, which is, I don't even think it's clear that carbon dioxide is actually a problem, but we can leave that aside. That'll get me in trouble with the College of Psychologists again.
Okay, so that's bullshit though. It's like there are mountains of evidence that the rapid increase in carbon dioxide, like the sheer amount of it over such a short period of time, is what's the problem. It's not that carbon dioxide is bad in general. There should be, like, not in a fucking hippie way, there should be a good amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to prevent from destroying the ozone layer and causing increased exposure to sunlight to damage the environment. This is like one of many different effects of climate change and the effects of carbon. And I'm sure as fuck not an expert on climate change, but you learn this fucking shit in elementary school, man. Like Jordan Peterson's supposed to be this brilliant intellectual, and since he's joined the Daily Wire in particular and all on Twitter all the time lately, he just has these totally fucking predictable conservative takes on every issue. They're so like ridiculously boring and infuriating at the same time.
But Lomberg says,
It's
look,
a factor.
Yeah, it's a factor. Yeah. But there's lots of factors, and God only knows what the most pressing problems that confront us truly are. When I wandered through the ecological sustainability literature about 10 years ago, and I concluded a couple of things. One was that the best way forward to a sustainable planet is to make everyone who's poor rich as fast as you possibly can.
And that's Lomberg's position,
not
too.
to put limits to growth on, because
okay, but that's a good idea. But that, like, contrary to what they claim there, that doesn't actually solve problems of climate change. That solves, like, if anything, that kind of increases problems of climate change. But it's the reason it's a difficult problem is because like they say, they're right that you have to suppress other countries' economic development if you want to focus on renewable energy resources to reduce climate change, and then they won't gain the economic boom from oil and natural gas that other so-called first world countries have. That's why it's a difficult problem, but that's why, like, like some people like Bjorn Lomborg and even other climate change skeptics I've heard have talked about the importance of of technological development in renewable energy sources, like basically making solar panels and windmills and other renewable energy sources much more much cheaper to manufacture, to the point that they're cheaper than oil and natural gas, and then there will be an economic incentive to do that. Like, I agree with them that seems like the only way this sort of thing is actually going to realistically happen.
Because turns out if you get people above about $5,000 a year in average GDP, they start taking long-term view of the future instead of scrabbling around in the dirt trying to get lunch, and you're going to burn everything.
Yeah, but like, part of the long-term vision of the future is the importance of climate change. And if you're saying that like, if he's making this point to say that you should enrich poor people in order to get them to have a more long-term perspective and care more about things like climate change, then, like, why not just have the people who can already spend the money on doing something about climate change do that, and also try to help poor people at the same time? You can try to solve more than one problem at a time. And like, this is just a dumb argument. You don't have to sacrifice poor people to solve the problem of climate change. That's just not, but that's not true. That's not a thing that has to happen.
Thing up around you to stay alive if you have to.
Right.
But if you got a bit of wealth, and now you can think over, maybe a 20-year period, which is quite the damn luxury, then you actually start being concerned about, the quality, the aesthetic quality of the local environment. And so I was so excited when I found that data, because I thought, oh, this is so cool. It means that we could have our cake and eat it too. We could work really hard to provide cheap, reliable energy, at the lowest cost possible to the widest number of people worldwide. And the emergent consequence of that would be the whole planet would clean itself up. So that
would be a good idea.
Wouldn't that be great? Because we could make our goal the eradication of absolute poverty, which we actually done pretty good at eliminating over the last 15 years, but we could really make that a goal. And then one of the consequences of that, inevitable consequences, would be a greener and healthier planet. And then you think, well, why aren't we doing that?
See, that wouldn't be an inevitable consequence, though, and that's a slower way to solve the problem of climate change. A slower way to go about that is by enriching poor people. Like I said, you can pursue two different problems at the same time. You can help poor people, and you can try to solve the problem of climate change. Otherwise, by the time the poor people are wealthy enough to solve the problem of climate change, they won't be able to anyway, because there already have been, like, if they live on coastal cities, their cities will have already been flooded anyway by that time. So this is like, this argument makes like, he's a real expert in specious arguments because he's good at rhetoric, Jordan Peterson is, but this argument ultimately makes no fucking sense.
That's a question, all right. And I think part of the reason is I've been trying to understand the driving ideas underneath this globalist utopian tyranny that seems to be developing from the top down.
The globalist utopian tyranny. Now he's sounding like Alex Jones.
the postmodern neo-Marxists, the globalist tyranny, they're also interdimensional child molesters, and they're faking mass shootings and shit like that, man. It's now buy my silver because it'll cure all your diseases.
And I think it's driven, at least in part, by this religious vision that I already described, that you have to construe culture itself, especially industrial culture, as the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way, which is unbelievable.
Culture is the tyrannical father raping and pillaging everything in its way? The fuck is he talking about, man? I think I might just be missing the point. As humble as possible, but that sounds fucking ridiculous.
Unbelievably dangerous way to think, too one-sided. And the idea that you have to impose limits to growth on people in order to have a sustainable planet.
Oh, he's saying that that's the idea of climate change activists, that people think that people who are opposed to doing something about climate change are evil and tyrannical and shit like that. Like, okay, again, if that's the case, then again, like, that's a tiny minority of people who care about climate change, and probably a minority of climate change activists too. Like, the people like Greta Thunberg do not represent the majority of climate change activists, I bet. And especially just, people who care about that shit in general. You don't have to be this like fucking cringy woke lefty to care about climate change. Like, this shit is dumb.
And that's allied with a view that probably stems all the way back to people like Paul Ehrlich in the 1960s, who really believe, truly, that maybe the planet should only have 500 million people on it, or a billion.
Okay, again, now here Jordan Peterson is doing what James Lindsay does, and he's saying, okay, so because this guy believed this idea, this anti-natalist idea a long time ago, which is what he's talking about fucking population control and people not having kids deliberately so that you can save the climate. So save the climate by killing people. So he's implying that this is the idea of like people like Greta Thunberg and AOC and climate change activists in general, that they want to fucking engage in population control. This is how he sounds exactly like fucking Alex Jones, man. I want black helicopters. I have the documents. They're coming in to engage in population control. It's more and more like fucking Alex Jones all the time, man. Oh, Dusty says that's suit he's wearing is so fucking stupid looking. Yeah, he explained. Watch the podcast. He explained at the beginning of the podcast that there's some sort of like spiritual message to it. It's like half order, half chaos, or some shit like that. His like religious stick about that shit.
And in relative poverty, or 2 billion barely scraping by, because otherwise they're going to be wrecking everything, and controlled by some top-down authority that makes bloody well sure that no one's consuming too much. And so when I look at ideas like that first assumption, the planet has too many people on it.
Okay, but again, this is a fucking straw man, man. It's not like the fucking, again, the majority of people who care about climate change, or even climate change activists, go around saying there should be a limited population. Like, this is so fucking stupid, man.
It's like, I don't like to hear people say that, because when I hear that, I think, okay, buddy, who exactly are you thinking about getting rid of? Oh.
Okay, buddy. No, I need to get my voice right.
The postmodern neo-Marxists, okay, buddy, you can't do anything about climate change because that's the evil tyrannical father behavior, okay?
Well, it's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like that.
It has to be like that.
It is absolutely like that. And so, it's easy to get all paranoid, conspiracy.
Dusty said he's got that Daily Wire mind virus. He totally does, man. Like, this, like, climate change activists are part of this evil conspiracy theory conspiracy that are trying to engage in fucking population control.
Conspiracy theorist about the WEF say, and maybe there's some utility in that, but
this is actually, he's referencing that stupid James Lindsay shit about how the World Economic Forum are somehow a group of fucking billionaires who are somehow also Marxists, who are trying to take over the world and engineer engineer the Great Reset by forcing people to get vaccinated and grooming children to be trans in order to engineer a global Chinese social credit system where no one owns anything, and they own everything. That is the fucking World Economic Forum conspiracy theory that fucking James Lindsay talks about, that he referenced there.
Oh, I don't think anybody's sitting at Davos going, well, we got to scrap 7 billion people. But if the underlying narrative is the one I just described, virginal planet, tyrannical patriarchy, and rapacious.
Okay, like, what evidence does he have that this is the fucking narrative of climate change activists or people who care about climate change in general? He's saying this is the idea of these evil groups like the World Economic Forum and Davos, who are apparently trying to do something about climate change. Like, that makes them even more evil? Like, what is he even... He's just making wild fucking claims here, not having evidence for anything. Again, like he's in the Daily Wire now, just like fucking Ben Shapiro, making wild claims with not even a hint of evidence behind them.
Just individual, and you believe, well, we're overpopulated, like Paul Ehrlich has believed since literally the mid-1960s, then how is it not going to be that the policies that you craft stem?
Yeah, exactly, Dusty. You're right. Like, Kyle Kalinski's made this point before, too. I'm sure all of these billionaires want their wealth redistributed. Yeah, like, you think these billionaires are actually Marxists and want to give all their money to poor people and shit, and they simultaneously also want to control everyone and own everything? Like, this doesn't make any sense, man.
Stemming from that narrative are colored by the belief that there's far too many people.
Okay, so yeah, that was hilariously stupid. Again, I enjoy way too much criticizing Jordan Peterson's phenomenally dumb takes sometimes, like how literally he thinks that climate change activists are part of a religion and they want population control.
The climate change activists are part of a religion and they want population control. So stay away, bucko, you mighty climate change activists with the tyrannical father power.
Dusty said California is literally running out of water due to population exceeding supply. Yeah, population is a problem. That doesn't mean you go population control. It's a negative effect of climate change too, right? And unfortunately, it seems like when there are too many people, or there's too much of a high population in one area, then there's the rise of diseases, like we saw recently with the Decepticons, aka the virus, right? And we've seen that all throughout history, of course, with like the Black Plague and all that shit. But yeah, anyway, I don't mean to go off on a tangent there. Anyway, so thanks everyone for watching me comment on this latest stupidness of Jordan Peterson, where he's having this ridiculously crazy take about climate change activists in particular. Anyway, yeah. And yeah, share this everywhere. Click that like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos, probably either tomorrow or Friday. I'm going to talk with my friend Chris again. We're going to talk about some kind of political topics. We're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine, maybe these UFOs supposedly getting shot down recently, and also the Twitter files shit, I think. So look forward to that as well. And then this weekend, Dusty, who is commenting on this video, we're going to talk about Fat Man, my second favorite Christmas movie now, in which Mel Gibson plays a badass killer Santa Claus, and the elves manufacture weapons for the U.S. military. So check out all that, and yeah, check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of the video, as always. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Jordan Peterson does make some good points, and he's helped some people sometimes, but he also, as often happens with public intellectuals, just builds this cult of personality around him to the point that he makes incredibly dumb points that are reinforced by his cultish audience. So he makes points that sound really good because he's good at rhetoric, but they're specious arguments that are ultimately extremely fucking dumb. So anyway, thanks again everyone for watching, and adios until next time.